Welcome back to Magic Hour, everyone. I'm your host, Taylor Page.
And I'm Claire. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
I'm so excited to share this conversation with Theresa today. We discuss the intersection of the spiritualist movement in 19th century America with feminism and the suffragist movement, and how spirituality has been a power source for women throughout time and history. And it's just such an important topic because the archetype of the witch is inherently the archetype of a woman in her power, a woman not afraid to be in her power, but also to tap into her desires, to tap into her magic, and also to make the world a better place. And so I think that there's an inherent connection between the witch archetype and trying to work for a world that's more beautiful for future generations to come. And I love how the spiritualist movement and the suffragist movement and the abolitionist movement all came to a crescendo to exemplify that, where basically women, and I'll go much deeper into this with Theresa, in the 1800s were so confined. We're not allowed to be religious leaders. We're not even allowed to speak in public. And through spiritualism and connecting with spirit and sharing messages rooted in spiritual power, that broke boundaries for the women's rights movement. And because it has to do with magic and the spirit world and witchiness, it's been buried in time. Most women don't know, most people don't know the first woman who ever ran for president was a psychic medium. The second female lawyer in California, Laura DeForest Gordon, psychic medium, who had a big part in moving to amend the California Constitution, disallowing women to practice any profession. Mary Todd Lincoln, seances in the White House. And it's funny too, because this is such a shadowy topic. Like, people are very much in the broom closet about prominent figures and what they believe in. And even as a professional practitioner in this work who reads for clients all around the world, and some of them are high profile and some of them are from high profile families, it's like they might publicly be saying things, but behind the closed doors, they're practicing this type of stuff too. So I think these conversations are really important to highlight a lot of these prominent people and allies of women's rights and equality for all who help move the pendulum forward in this country, especially who that whole part of them has been erased purposefully.
Oh, it's just so interesting. And you know me, I love this kind of topic because I'm so passionate about women's rights. And it's amazing to hear about this and find out all the details and, hear these crazy things like women weren't allowed to speak in public. I mean, it is just, our history is so wild. Our her story is so wild. And you've talked about this so much. It's like the reason that they want to silence us, the reason for the oppression is because they feel and know our power. And so it makes so much sense that the spiritualist element of it was really buried. And that goes back to like the power of witches and healing women and all of that. It's like we are such powerful, powerful goddesses, and they want us to forget that and they want to silence us. And I loved something that Theresa said. She said, once they started speaking publicly, the cat was out of the bag. It was like there was no going back. And I think that's so important to remember in this moment right now.
Yeah. And I just want to take a moment of silence to thank all of the women and the allies and everybody who came before us so that we could be on a podcast right now talking about our magic and spirituality and evidence of life after physical death. So thank you so much to our brave, pioneering ancestors who healed the witch wound and gave us all permission to do the same. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I feel you. And I remember, like, when I was waiting in line to vote one year, I felt all of them around me there. There's just so much gratitude and so much power. And speaking about being in 2025 and women not being allowed to speak publicly, I've been seeing news reports about women in Afghanistan where it's literally illegal to speak in public and hear another woman's voice now. So it's like these things are still very prominent. I think it was Pam Grossman who said, if you want to know how a society feels about women, show me their witches. And that is just so true. And so women's rights politics, women's power, it's all woven in this archetype of the witch. And the witch is connected to spirit and the land and stewardship. And I think that the spiritualist movement of the 1900s was unique in that it wasn't fear based and it wasn't rooted in like punishment and patriarchal power structures. It was rooted in a wholehearted, earnest desire for evidence. And that's what I love about spiritualism. So, the zeitgeist of this time period was very much about like the telegraph being invented and people trying to understand how messages got from one place to another and electricity. Like people were starting to recognize that there are invisible currents of energy that we can't see, including electricity, radio waves, things like that. And that's why spiritualism was such a blossoming open and people were more open to this because there was proof of that. Like, when the White House first wanted to send a telegraph somewhere, some superstitious people were like, spirits are telling them the message. Like, it just shows that science and magic have always been on like a hairline of our understanding of energy. But that's what I love about spiritualism is that they were like, okay, we want to earnestly prove to you that life exists after physical death, and we are going to devote our lives to creating good evidence for that. And this was a time period where science was starting to really ramp up, and things around like gravity and invisible forces, like I said, were really starting to amp up. And I think spiritualism, like I said, magic and science are different sides of the same coin. So that made spiritualism want evidence and science backing and to understand and study what they couldn't explain as well. And so for modern day scientists, you wouldn't think of that being as like a controlled scientific method study, but to their level of science in the day, it was scientific and it was cutting edge. And so that's what I really love about spiritualism. And there's still an aspect of that very much present in spiritualist teachings today is like, show me the evidence. And that's what really resonates with me.
Yeah, same. I think it's such a powerful tool in this connection because, I think there's a lot of fear around being misguided or believing in something that isn't true. Or I've had a lot of that fear and trepidation around like organized religion and the thought of dedicating myself to a belief system that's just all made up or whatever. I think there's just fear around that. And so the evidence aspect of it is really comforting and also just really powerful. And I think something else too that I really loved that you guys got into as well is like, of course, spiritualism is about the oneness of this experience. And so within that oneness, of course, there is this understanding that equality is about everything. It's about the earth and every human being. So I loved how they brought that into the feminist movement from the spiritualist side. And then it got muddy and difficult, but just that when we fight for equality, we must fight for all equality, every human being's equality, every creature's equality. And I just think that's so beautiful and important to remember right now as we face similar challenges, different but similar challenges that they did back then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another layer of this too, with like women's rights and suffragist movement and spiritualism, is that I feel like women and queer people kind of gravitate towards this spiritual work. Like it's almost like I don't know, we understand it naturally. Maybe it's just sort of us being in touch with our emotions more, or I don't know what it is. But like when I go to Arthur Finley College, it's like mostly all women and LGBTQ people. It's like when I have client sessions, it's 99% women and LGBTQ people. It's like there is just a like almost in the patriarchal way, we don't value the unseen as much. It's almost like a feminine thing, these subtle whispering currents of guidance. I don't know. It's like I'm trying to put my finger on it here. But I think that's also an element too, is that this has been an arena where, especially like women and femmes and LGBTQ community are valued for our voices in a way that we haven't been valued or we've been purposely excluded from a lot of other arenas. And I think that's like a part of spiritual feminism, personally, I feel like I've always been welcomed in this space. I feel like people I've never felt barred from this space where when I was a comedy writer, I did feel that. Like I did feel like it was mostly a boys' club and I wasn't really welcome there. And it was very difficult with my heavy, painful periods to even fit into the work schedule there and everything about it. It's like, I remember dating this guy at the time, and he could just go with the head writer for a beer after work. Whereas, like me as a woman, I could never do that because there would just be weird connotations there. So, anyway, these other industries that I've been a part of and working to gain traction in always felt way more difficult and like I was starting a hair step back. And that's already acknowledging my privilege as a white woman. And so within the spiritual spaces, I just feel like there is this sort of subtle current of you are welcome here, your voice is valued here, and it's almost expected for you to be like, yeah, of course, like that's what a witch looks like, or this is what I understand her being an expert here. And so I think that's something that, although the witch wound in the history of persecution, like the flip side of it is us trying to hide our magic, there has also been centuries of acknowledging that the power is there and that there is something to fear in our power. And so the flip side is acknowledging, like, no, there is this magical connection with the divine feminine that exists, and that their persecution is almost setting us up for proof of that.
Yes, absolutely. And just such another perfect example of how powerful we are when we lift each other up, when we believe in each other, when we give each other that permission to shine brightly, to be our authentic selves. Like, I think as a woman in this world, it is easy to feel very powerless or to feel kind of like on the back foot, like you said, in the comedy world and in so many industries, it's so dominated by men that it can feel hard to assert yourself or be looked at as an equal or get the same kind of leg up. And we have that power to give to each other, maybe not in those spaces yet, but in whatever spaces that we are in, we can do that with each other and for each other.
Yes, I love that. And I think there's also, just to add to that, is like, let's stop apologizing for our spiritual beliefs. Like, let's get out of the broom closet. It's like the spiritualist movement being such a champion of the feminist movement. Like, it's fine if we don't all believe the same thing. But if you are somebody who has spiritual gifts, it's like, by us diminishing them and hiding them and editing them out, it only empowers the systems that have systematically erased that from the bigger picture of Herstory. And we do it to ourselves in our own personal stories. And I think that healing the witch wound is such an important part of women's right as well. So I think, if anything, I hope this conversation also shines a light on how it's time to come out of the broom closet, as they say, and how it's time to stop apologizing for our knowing and our wisdom and our beliefs. And if it doesn't make sense to other people, that's fine. But at the bare minimum, they have to be respectful.
Yes, and I think you guys touch on it in the episode, but just by doing that, you give permission to another witch, another woman to step into the power of her gifts. So even if it feels scary doing it for yourself, know that you're also doing it for other women. You give yourself and another permission when you choose to step out of the broom closet and shine your beautiful, authentic, witchy self into this world.
Yes, just like previous generations have done for us. If they listened to their witch wound, if they stayed small, if they were afraid to be inconvenient or heard or seen or too powerful, where would we be today? And so, how can we move the yardstick forward for future generations too?
That's such a good point. That's such a good point. And I'm just, yet again, to say this again, like so grateful to every woman that has come before and that is currently now doing that work and not apologizing to be her beautiful self. So thank you to all the generations and to everyone doing it now. Your efforts and your light are not going unnoticed.
And we love you. We love you both, spirit people and people here and people to come. Those of you doing this work, we love you.
We love you.
Okay, so let's introduce our guest now. Theresa C. Dintino is the author of 8 books and serves as a guide and spiritual mentor to many. In 2017, Theresa and her sister Maria Dintino created the website Nasty Women Writers, celebrating and giving voice to powerful women of all times and places. Nasty Women Writers publishes weekly posts about the work of vibrant and essential women who, because they speak their minds and use their voices, tend to be called #nasty. Nasty Women Writers says no to this shutdown of powerful women's voices and claims nasty as a stance of power. Teresa's most recent book, co-authored with Rory Tor, is The Oscan Oracle from the Ancient Genera of the Moon. Teresa is also the author of Membranes of Hope, a guide to attending the spiritual boundaries that keep life systems healthy from the personal to the cosmic, The Amazon Pattern, a message from ancient women diviners of trees and time, Notes from a Diviner in the Postmodern World, a handbook for spirit workers, and Teaching from the Trees, spiritual mentoring from the Standing Ones. Welcome, welcome, Teresa. Teresa, welcome to Magic Hour. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited about this conversation, and it's so great to meet you, Taylor, and Claire.
Thank you. So, we always like to start the podcast with 2 questions. The first is, what is your sun, moon, and rising in astrology?
My sun is Scorpio, my moon is Scorpio, and my rising is Aquarius.
Wow. So you're a Scorpio new moon baby. I love that. I'm a Scorpio as well. So we connect on that.
Yes.
I love that. And the second question that I like to ask is, how does your intuition speak to you?
Yeah, I've been hearing you ask this question of people, and I'm like, what would I say? Well, for me, it's a full-bodied experience, I would say, and it comes in many different ways. So I'm very visual, so I see a lot. And then I hear things. Some of it is internal voices, guides, ancestors. I've come to be able to recognize different voices and know who's speaking, and that's been very helpful. And then I also just feel things very much in my body. And depending on where in my body, it might mean a different thing. So, a very felt experience as well.
I love that. And I love what you said about how you can recognize the different voices of your guides. I think that's such a beautiful development of clairaudience and so helpful, like you said. And when you said seeing is one of your main psychic senses, how do those seeings come to you? How do you experience that seeing?
Well, it depends what I'm doing. So, kind of the modality of how, if I'm doing a divination, often I will see who is with the person or someone that comes in or an issue. So, my guides will show things to me as an image. And then I have to kind of deconstruct why they're showing me that and what it means and do all that investigative work, which we Scorpios love. So, yeah, so they'll show me images. And the certain guides that I work with in divination are elemental beings, a lot of them. So, a lot of times they're showing me things that are somewhat comical. So, pulling on my own psyche to get me to understand what they're trying to say. But then I guess when I'm writing, I will just I'll have a picture and I will be writing that picture. I don't know how else to say it except that I see sometimes it's real physical things that I will see, other times it's in my mind's eye and kind of feels like a vision.
I love that. Thank you so much for that description. So, I'm so excited to get into this talk with you today. And I feel like it goes with your big 3 so well, with your Scorpio sun and moon and your Aquarius rising, with the spiritualism, the mediumship, the connection to the other side with that Scorpio, and the human rights and humanitarianism and justice for all with Aquarius. So, I love the fusion of this. So, we're speaking today about spiritualism and the tie to women's rights in the United States of America. And I felt like this was a really relevant conversation to have today because obviously we're in similar energetic ground where women's rights are being threatened, where we need unity, where we need connection. And the spiritualist movement was a big part of the women's rights movement, but the traditional feminist historians, the women's right movement, they edit out the influence of spiritualism in the history of that, and they keep these spiritual medium women figures who are very prominent in the broom closet, because there is this bigger collective shadow around embracing spirituality and being discredited. And so, to rewind it, can you explain to our audience, first off, what is spiritualism?
Well, the spiritualism that I write about in the article on Nasty Women Writers that you found is the spiritualism of the 19th century. So I just want to be clear, because spiritualism is still going on. It does still exist as a practice. I'm assuming they're similar to the 19th century, but the 19th century spiritualist movement, and as it intersected with what we think of as first wave feminism, started in like 1848 with these two young women, the Fox sisters, in upstate New York. They were hearing some rapping sounds in their home, and they determined that it was the ghost or the spirit of someone who had died and was buried under the house. And then they started to decode the tapping and the rappings and get messages from this spirit. And then I guess that they began to go to other places and decode these rappings and tappings. And it lit a fire in the population of the Americans at that time, who really, from what I've read, who were really missing having a connection to the dead, having connection to the deceased and their deceased family members and ancestors. It had been really frowned upon by the Puritan belief system that kind of was the main Calvinist belief system at the time, especially in the North. So spiritualism actually grew out of that. It also grew out of a man named Swedenborg who practiced in Europe. So the thing that's interesting about the spiritualism of that time is that it was this really what I consider a very beautiful, liberating form of, I'm not going to call it religion because it wasn't a religion, form of spirituality that anyone could participate in. So out of the Fox sisters grew this whole popular and especially with women way to communicate with the dead. And so it came in many forms and evolved into what most people think now of mediumship. And the spiritualists were all feminists, but not all feminists were spiritualists, but all the spiritualists were feminists because the spiritualists believed in equality for all. So it was really a revolutionary movement, is how I consider it. They believed in equality for all. They believed especially in freeing women, liberating women from the really strict regulation and constraints they were living under in the patriarchal paradigm. They really were about women's health. It was a broad range of subjects that the spiritualists were interested in. So they were also political. Their spiritualism was this egalitarian form. So anyone could be a spiritualist, anyone could be a medium. But the thing that was really interesting was until this movement, women were not allowed to speak in public. They were not allowed. But since they were considered to not really be speaking for themselves, these women, they were channeling someone else, they somehow got a pass. And the spiritualist women really took advantage of it. They started speaking and really using their voices. And I really believe that the spiritualists gave voice to American women because suddenly you could go to all these places and see these women speaking in public and having really large audiences, very popular public women. And that was something completely new at the time. And once they did that, there was no pushing it back in the box. Women had their voice and they were going to use them. So they really paved the way for women to be able to speak in public and have opinions and things to say. And that was huge. The other thing about the spiritualists, well, all the movements that were spawned from it, like the health food movement, the free love movement, women wearing bloomers. I mean, they were so revolutionary in everything they were doing. So I would say that until the Civil War, They were really, really popular. And so the people that are listening to this might know them as the people that did seances, because that's something that's become very, most people have seen those depicted in films, but that came out of the spiritualists. Also, the Ouija board came out of the spiritualist movement. They were also abolitionists. But once the Civil War happened, a lot of fracturing came into many of the groups that said, well, we need to focus only on abolition, or we need to focus only on the vote. And it started to, and things got very, I don't know, dissipated. And then, as you said, a lot of the feminists, people who were especially for the suffrage, separated themselves from the spiritualists to gain acceptance with the patriarchal paradigm in order to get the vote. Or that's how I see it anyway. What I've noticed with this pattern, right? There's this big movement. It's great. A lot of times it has a spiritual component. Women get power, they're empowered. And then as they try to make more gains in the culture at large, they start to sell pieces of it off so that they can be more acceptable to the general population. And often spirituality, especially spirituality where the women are taking full authority of their spirituality and the women are standing in their power, often that gets pushed aside.
Yes. So there's so much that you just said that I want to respond to. So going back to 19th century America, the fact that women were not allowed to speak in public is absolutely wild. And I think a perfect metaphor for that is the corsets that they were expected to wear at that time. And I think spiritualism is so beautiful that it gave women a chance to use their voice. What hurts me about this is that it was only because they were channeling someone else on the other side that their voice was allowed to be heard. But nonetheless, I appreciate the gateway drug that that turned into. But it gives me that similar energy of, oh, I have a boyfriend, and then that guy walks away from you at the bar. Like it gives this similar energy of like you not having power yourself, but you expressing a connection to someone outside of yourself and that being respected more than you just being a woman in your power. It's kind of like even with abortion rights today, it's like the baby in your womb has so much power, but then when it's out into the physical world, it doesn't. And it's like the women here weren't allowed to speak, but then when they're in the spirit world, they can be channeled through. It's like such an interesting cognitive dissonance. So that makes me so sad from a modern woman's perspective, but it also makes me really grateful for these women that came before and pioneered. And as any psychic medium knows, like spirit is so love filled. And so I love that a higher consciousness was able to permeate the zeitgeist at that time through spiritualism. I also want to comment on what you said about all spiritualists being feminists, not all feminists being spiritualists, which is totally fine. We can all have our different beliefs, but that what you spoke to about the kind of selling things off as women started to get more power. And I find that that really coincides with a pattern that I see a lot of that I think is no longer serving women overall, which is trying to get power and make it into a masculine shape. Like we try to lean into masculine as power, but I think that these spiritual realms, our women's intuition, our connection to spirit is an essential part of our power and has been throughout most of herstory before patriarchal religions came to wash it away. There's so much talk about the pendulum swinging back to the divine feminine. And I think a part of that is not modeling what our power looks like after the structures that men have created.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to say that I was so excited by the invitation to speak on this subject because it's really near and dear to my heart. And the primary book that I use for this research is Radical Spirits by Anne Broad. This is, if people are watching this video, first time I read that book, I was so angry. You were speaking about my sense of justice and the Scorpio. I couldn't even breathe. I was so angry because I didn't know about this. I did not know. I knew I'd seen the seances. I'd seen these women made fun of over and over in movies. And when I ever found out that they pretty much catapulted the whole feminist movement in this country, I was so angry that they'd been so erased, so made fun of. And like you're saying, I mean, it touches on experiences that we've all had where we just find out these basic omissions of history and they concern marginalized people, and women I consider marginalized people. And it's like you were saying, women were always the priestesses, the oracles, the people that were running the temples. There were matriarchal societies. I mean, it's not ever anything new to have women in power. It's just this little blip of 4,000 years where it's been new. And to have to actually like climb out of this hole and beg for it, it just makes me so angry. I hear what you're saying there, and I felt it again when I wrote the article because I had put the book aside for a couple of years. I was like, I can't even, I'm too angry. And then when I tried to and right as I had the same feeling of rage welling up in me. And then I was preparing for this talk. I went and read the introduction to the book again, and again it was there. I was like, I can't believe it's still there. It's very upsetting. And I really agree with you that, I mean, we don't, I don't like it that women feel that they need to fit themselves into the patriarchal boxes. But it's not untrue either, right? So it's so complex. This whole issue is so complex because, I mean, I know of countless women who have psychic gifts, who are clairvoyant, who are even, diviners and psychics, and they use a pen name, they use a false identity so that people won't know, or because they want to get an advanced degree and that's going to completely discredit them, or they want to get a certain job and that will stop them from getting the job. So it just goes on and on. And it really is a catch 22 for women because they are shut out unless they toe the line. And yet that's not satisfying most of the time.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. Like, we fit into masculine boxes because we've had to toe the line. And I think it's a little unfair of me to look back as a woman in 2025 and be so frustrated for the women in the 19th century. So I definitely understand that wiggle room. I just know the amazing power. I just love women so much. So I get heated about this topic. But even going back to like 19th century and this blip in our history of patriarchal religions, like women weren't allowed to be leaders, religious leaders. There were some exceptions, like you mentioned in the Quaker religion, but there would still be summits that women weren't included in certain cases. But like spiritualism as a movement was the first one to say there's no hierarchical power structure. Everybody can be powerful. There were Black women really involved in the spiritualist movement. There were big goals for the movement to abolish slavery, the suffragist movement, equality for all. So I just think that it's so beautiful how, in the midst of all of these repressed religious expressions, that spiritualism found its way forward. And I just think that women taking up spaces in spiritual leadership is so important. And it's so interesting to me. Like, the erasure of feminine power is very purposeful in history. Even the way that you said that you saw the Fox sisters being demeaned or said that they're silly, it's like this language, I call it patriarchal PR. And it's very precise and it's very much by design. So women worshiping goddess energy throughout history are described as cults. When women can connect with the other side, we're witches, we're talking to demons, we're doing evil things. When men do it, they're literally God. So there's like the language of men in religion is sacred, holy, blessed. Women are silly, frauds, delusional, witches, evil. And so the language that we use is so important. And what you said too about these women, who are gifted that have to write under a pen name or hide in the shadows, it's just all so connected. And that's why this episode was so important to me today, to shine light on these amazing historical figures who never got credit for their place in helping women gain the vote, in helping grieving mothers and parents connect with their children on the other side. It's like they did so much good in the world and they've been purposely erased.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That's really beautifully said.
And so I want to talk about some of these women that have been purposely erased. One of them that comes to mind is Victoria Woodhull. She is famously known as the first woman to ever run for president, and she was also a big part of the spiritualist movement. I have here that she was the first person to create a woman owned newspaper in the United States. She was the first woman to create a Wall Street broker house and the first woman to appeal to Congress for women to vote. She was a very powerful woman in the spiritualist movement, and she catapulted women's rights, and she was very contradictory in her day. And a lot of people don't know that the first woman who ever ran for president was a psychic medium. So I think that that's just a perfect example and metaphor that, like, we're hidden in plain sight. There's a quote that says, "There's a witch wherever you are." And so I think witches have been hidden in plain sight. Witchy women, spiritual women, women connected to, their psychic senses have always had to be hidden in plain sight. I also read in your article that Mary Todd Lincoln held seances in the White House. And I think that the Civil War brought up a time with a lot of collective grief and loss and death, and spiritualism was coming about in a time where people wanted proof of life after death and not such heavy narratives about your soul going to hell or you being condemned. That wasn't resonating with people who were losing loved ones in great numbers. And so I think it's so interesting how, again, that history has been carefully erased. And I'm just wondering if there's anything else you want to contribute to that, whether it's a person in the movement that you look up to, or something like a fact about this that has been overlooked, or just anything you want to share.
Well, a lot of the spiritualists did go into politics. Once the movement kind of in the 1880s, it started to break apart. A couple of the women that really stand out for me personally, one is Sarah Grimke. So the Grimke sisters from South Carolina, there were these two sisters that their parents owned slaves and they owned a plantation, and they both left the plantation because they really weren't comfortable. And they moved to the north and they became Quakers to begin with. Very many of these women, they would move through several different religious sects before they would just abandon them altogether for the liberation that was spiritualism, because it really was a true form of liberation, which is really intriguing as well, because for all the advances we've made, I don't think women have liberation at all on the planet right now. So Sarah, she left the Quakers because they wouldn't let her speak in public either, even though women did have a voice in the Quaker world, but it wasn't enough of a voice. She and her sister were huge abolitionists, and when they went to speak about abolition, they received such backlash because women weren't supposed to be speaking in public, that they had their feminist consciousness awakened at that moment, where they were like, wait, we can't speak about abolition because we're women. Something's wrong here. And so Sarah especially became a huge feminist, and she's one of the first feminist texts, American feminist texts. So Sarah Grimke is someone that I think more people might want to know about. And she really understood the complexities of sexism, and she really broke them down. And she also understood that it wasn't just abolition that they needed to eradicate, they needed to eradicate racism. So she was really clear, like, this isn't about abolition, really. This is about racism. We need to root racism out of our hearts, is what she said. So they were really amazing, powerful women. The other woman that I got really interested in and wrote another piece about is Hilma af Klint. She's an artist. So after I wrote the piece on the spiritualists, I went to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and there was this painting hanging there. And it said Hilma af Klint channeled this painting, and it had something that she'd written. And I was like, oh, and it said she was a spiritualist. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, spiritualist art. So she was a Swedish woman. And if you haven't seen her art, I highly recommend. But once the movement started to fall apart in the United States, it really jumped to Europe, and it really took off there for quite a while. And it turned into theosophy and anthroposophy. And anthroposophy is Rudolf Steiner's. Basically, he created anthroposophy, but he was also a spiritualist to begin with. But Hilma was a spiritualist. And at this time, a lot of the spiritualists were painters, and they were letting the spirits work through them in their paintings. And she was amazing, amazing woman who she ran a group of 13 women that they would get together and they would do channeling and mediumship. And she got this, I guess you would call it, she was given the task to create a series of paintings, which she was told they would show other humans how the cosmos works. So she created these incredible, I think, 193 paintings for a temple. She called them the temple paintings. And she had this beautiful dream of them all being hung in this spiraling temple that people would walk up. And as they observed the paintings, they would like ascend into a spiritual place. But she had a really hard time because she couldn't show her paintings anywhere. And she tried to show them to Steiner, and he kind of brushed her off. So it's also very painful to read the stories of a lot of these women's personal biographies because they suffered a lot. So Hilma af Klint is really a spiritualist to look into as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I have heard of her before, but I haven't checked out her art yet. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. And just her idea and her vision of going up this spiral temple and reaching ascension with those images is so powerful. And yeah, it's so true. Like so many of these spiritualist women and people were ahead of their time. Like she couldn't be famous, but now we can resonate with her. It reminds me of how spirit leaves little Easter eggs when we look back on things. It's like these people and their connection to spirit are such Easter eggs along the journey. And I think that we can learn so much from the women who came before us, the women who connected to their truth, authenticity, life's work, and spiritual connection, regardless of what society told them was acceptable. I feel so inspired by them. That's why I so love your website, Nasty Women Writers. Like, I just love that name so much. I think that us reclaiming those words that are hurled at us as insults is so powerful. Another thing that spiritualist women and women throughout history have threatened is the medical industry. You know, with the burning times and things like that, all of the wise women, the healers, that was around the time of the advent of medical school, which of course women were never allowed to go to. And that folk healing threatened that establishment. And because women have been left out of the healing world in med school, women's health is such a joke. I saw a stat that like erectile dysfunction has been studied 5 times more than like all of women's health combined or something like that. A fact check me on that one, but I saw a stat like that and I was like, you have to be joking. So, in that vein, spiritualists, another facet of their work is healing, energetic healing. And I know you were saying before that a big part of their presence and what they were trying to help people with was healing as well, like women's health. And so they were advocating against bloodletting and leeching and stuff like that. And they were like doing energetic healings on people, and it threatened doctors and it got a lot of criticism and things like that too. And I'm wondering what you think about that, or if there's anything you want to add to the health element of it.
Well, that's a huge piece. I mean, it's interesting because it's a little bit buried, and Hilma off Clint, because it was buried in one of the pages that she had done hands-on healing, and then they had a note from someone who had experienced the healing, but they didn't really go into much detail. But yes, it seems like they were doing a lot of hands-on healing. And I mean, this is a huge subject, right? The health in women's health and spiritualism and the witches. I mean, so my great grandmother was a Strega, and she worked in her village and she was a midwife. So a lot of times the spiritual leaders of the village were also midwives, went hand in hand. And she, when I tried to understand what a Strega was and write my novel, The Strega and the Dreamer, I just was shocked what the loss of these women has meant for us, what the loss of women that hold women's health care. I mean, was so shocking to me to read how we knew how to control our fertility with women, and that got completely erased. We knew how to offer, if you needed to terminate a pregnancy, you could go to the wise woman. If you needed help with your sexuality, you could go to the wise woman. If you needed help with anything that was going on from a female health point of view, you could go to the wise woman. And so literally eliminating these women from our villages, from our towns, from our psyches, has removed, I feel, women from their own bodies in a way that is so traumatic and so devastating. And so then we have these situations where people don't even really understand what the menstrual cycle is. They don't know what's going to happen to them when they're pregnant and have a child. They don't get any help with the nursing. I mean, there's a lot of people are doing really good work right now to this effect, and there are a lot of midwives. And so I'm not saying they don't exist anymore, and there aren't people doing really, really good work in these fields. But it's really been an uphill battle, because when my great immigrated to this country, they were literally systematically eliminating midwives. And it was actually something that was done very methodically and deliberately. So many people think so that the doctors could basically have birthing babies, because that's definitely pretty dependable. So, yeah, the spiritualists, they were like the natural food movement, the hydrotherapy, all those, a lot of, we call them alternative now, but at one point they weren't alternative. They were the medicine of the time. Allopathic medicine was the new one on the scene at this time, actually.
Yeah, and I think what you said too about them purposely efficiently eliminating midwives. Like, I heard Mia Magic talk about this. She was a guest on season 1, and she was like, it would be as if they were rounding up all of the doctors in modern society today and being like, okay, bye, you can't be here. Like, for us to truly understand how revolutionary that was back then, we would have to think about it in today's terms, like hospitals being cleared out, doctors being persecuted. I can't even imagine the flip side of women being like, we're inventing women's medicine school. All of the male doctors have to go, and men are not allowed to be doctors. It's only women. Like, I just can't even picture that. So it's so interesting to think about it in modern day terms so we can really understand like the impact of what that would have looked like. And I think the witch wound is like such an important part of this, because there's always this fear of prosecution and persecution to show our spiritual gifts, to be connected to source, to be in our power. And through generations of like what your grandmother experienced and many women and people before her, there is this sense of deeply internalized witch wound of it's not safe to be powerful, it's not safe to be inconvenient, it's not safe to be too visible, it's not safe to be magical. And that's what I'm really here to shine a light on and do a lot of work on with my platform and my voice. I feel very called to this subject. And it just strikes me how this wave of spiritualist women who made such amazing progress and were so pivotal for things as simple as women speaking in public and things as complicated as women getting the vote and women's health and things like that, that like that witch wound, that collective witch wound still continues to cast them in shadow. It's almost like we're still not ready to talk about it. And so for you personally, coming from an ancestral lineage where your grandmother was a strega, which for those that don't know, that's an Italian witch, has there been a grappling with the witch wound in you? Do you feel like there's ever been that instinct to hide or play it safe?
Oh, yes, definitely. Of course. Yeah. I mean, the lineage wasn't passed to me directly, because my grandmother, she didn't want to carry on the lineage. She thought it was old-fashioned. She wanted to be American. So the lineage was broken. But, well, definitely when I was on my way to becoming a diviner, which I see as the first step for my reclaiming my lineage in an outward fashion and really getting some skills and figuring out what it meant, I was terrified. Yeah. I called it the persecution pattern. I like that you call it the witch wound. I called it the persecution pattern. It's terrifying to come out with these kinds of gifts, this fear to be ridiculed. And I think that one of the things that really upsets me still about the witch wound and how it lives in our culture is it's still totally cool to ridicule people who do the things we do. and call us woo woo. And, it's perfectly fine to make fun of us. And I've been trying to put this out to people like, why is that okay? Why is it okay to make fun of people that have beliefs that maybe you don't believe in if they're woo woo? But, there's lots of other things we've thankfully educated people to stop making fun of people, but not this one. This one, we're still supposed to accept ridicule, and it's very hurtful, and it sends a lot of people back into their hidden place. So I said, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to hide because damn it, I'm sick of it. And I'm going to be proud of who I am and what I believe. But I know that I pay the cost of that in many, many ways. And a lot of times when I meet someone new and I tell them my name, when I walk away, I think, oh, now they're going to go Google me and they're going to find out who I really am. And so maybe next time they won't want to talk to me, which I'm fine with, but it's definitely a reality that is, something that we have to deal with and be okay with.
And the flip side is for every person that feels triggered or turned off or scared of your power and your magic, there's a person that they have permission granted by you being in your authenticity and shining your light. And that's who we have to do it for, is like our younger versions of self, people who are too nervous to start out on the path but feel this calling within them. So I think it's so beautiful that you've answered the call to meet your magic in your life. And I think that it's a beautiful service to by doing that, giving permission to others to do the same. I wanted to say too, like thinking about 19th century America, I too read the introduction of Anne Broad's book in preparation for this interview. And I was very struck by how similar the sentiment was then to where we are now. Like this feeling of persecution and stifling energy and injustice and all of those things. And I'm just wondering, like, from your historical research and from your approach, is there a takeaway from researching this topic that women then and people then that wanted to help progress women's rights and justice for all, is there something that you feel like they got right, or that we can look back on their lessons and take in this modern time where we really need to band together and be community in this space?
I really appreciated the non-hierarchical structure of spiritualism and that the power was decentralized. It's when people came in and started to do that it fell apart. When people came in and started to say, okay, we need to have a hierarchical structure. Who's in charge here? Let's get some rules. I feel that I wish we as humans would learn how to do that again, would learn how to be able to exist in groups where power is decentralized and shared. And so that a lot of the corruption that can be bred from structures that are more patriarchal can be possibly averted. So I really liked the way that the spiritualists had this live and let live philosophy. I also really liked that they felt nobody was free until everyone was free. It was really important to them. And they also very much worked with beliefs around the natural world and the oneness of all life, not just humans. I feel that that was really important. I feel that that really would be good if it were brought to the forefront again. That it's not just about humans, it's about all the life forms on the planet, that the trees also should have a voice, and the mountains should have a voice, and we should care about our ecosystem, and that the spirituality isn't only for humans. The spirituality is actually for the earth and from the earth and for all life. I really feel that that is important to bring back forward. They had so many. Well, I think that ancestor work is really, really important. And so in even seeing how they were able to revivify this need in humans to connect with the ancestors and the dead, really important now too.
I love that. And I think also spiritualism and reconnecting with grief on a large scale. The ancestral healing is so important, like you said, but there's also this element of deeper emotional healing that spiritualism brought about, because I feel like perhaps at that time, again, using that corset as a metaphor, there was such tight, strict parameters of what was emotionally acceptable, what was acceptable for each gender, what was acceptable for each race, et cetera, ethnicity. And I think that spiritualism, like, it brings it back to the humanity of being like, actually, we're very sad. Actually, we're missing someone. Actually, there's things that we want to talk about that are deeper. And I know talk therapy and therapy is like more of a modern thing. Like back then, it was like you just go to the psych ward or something. And you're like, if you're emotional, you're just like hysterical, send her off to like the mental hospital. But I think that there's also an emotional component to spiritualism that helps progress human consciousness in terms of like facing our grief and deeper emotional exploration that I find really beautiful. There's also no way that you can sit in the power of the spirit world and leave unchanged. So, the fact that all of these psychic mediums to me who were sitting in the love of spirit day in and day out, it makes perfect sense to me that they had a higher consciousness about equality and justice for all and what that should look like. And so I also think that that is really beautiful. And the last thing I want to hit on what you just said is this idea of ecofeminism. Since we're really tying this back to like the feminist movement, I think that the fact that spiritualists didn't see the earth as something owed to them, something they could consistently take from, the way that Christianity is like Eve was made for Adam. That's sort of a similar way that I think the general patriarchal consciousness views the earth. Like the earth was created for us, the animals were created for us. And I think ecofeminism kind of weaves the two together, like women's rights, women's bodies, and the ideas about that are woven together with the earth, being a steward of the earth, taking care of the earth. And I really like what you said about how we need to remember that and return to it, because I think that that's also a very essential part of how we need to move forward. It's like women's rights are always going to be inextricably linked with how we treat the land. And I think how we treat the land and women and all people outside of the status quo, it's like we all are this sort of ecosystem together. Like if you do a temperature check on one of us, the chances are the temperature check on the other will have similar reports. And so I think that's also so important, how they were like, no, everything is spirit. We honor the land. We take care of the land. We reconnect to the land. There's just so much wisdom in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really so much. And there's many ways to be spiritual. And I just think that if we could all just let each other be a little more around that, it would be easier for all of us. But it's super threatening. But we're blazing the trail. Women owning their power is good for everyone, including the earth.
Yeah. And I think the better for men too, to have partners in their power that challenge them to be better and grow with them. And one feeds the other. I think like a lot of men are in like a mental health crisis too. And like I was saying, we're all part of this symbiotic ecosystem. And when one is down, it doesn't help the other. So, yeah, and there were a lot of men that were allies in the spiritualist space too for these things. I just love that it gave a space to people with a higher consciousness that wanted to make change in the world. And I think that's so beautiful. And it's just interesting to see how we've made progress and yet core themes are still exactly where where it's seeming to be where they were before. And I like what you're saying about inclusivity, letting people have their own spiritual beliefs, leaving people alone if they're not harming anyone. I couldn't agree more. And even early spiritualists, like some of them would channel saints and be very much tied up with Christianity and be Christians and spiritualists. It's like, I think that we on earth can feel like everybody has to believe one thing for it to be right and like battle it out over that. But in reality, I believe all gods and goddesses are one god and goddess consciousness, and that all of us find our different pathways that resonate with us. And I think that that's something we can learn from in this modern day community, is like community can exist without us all believing the exact same things and practicing the exact same way. But are we leading with love and respect and kindness? Which kind of goes back to what you were saying as well about why is it okay to bully people in the spiritual spaces? And that reminds me of the very intentional language that has been used for generations to call women gullible, fanciful, silly. Like everything is dismissing our spiritual depth. And I think when we connect in that deep place and are not afraid to stand in it, like I say, they wouldn't go on a smear campaign against the witch if her magic wasn't real. So I think we have to remember that.
I do. And I also, I mean, one thing about the witch wound that's become very apparent to me too is that we as women, as a group, how do we participate in that against each other? You know, so the witch burnings could have never happened if women hadn't turned on each other. And so this is for me, once I started doing my more out public divination work, this came up really as a big teaching for me. And I was actually warned by a tree. She said, you know, you need to understand that this is really complex and it's still alive in women as a group. That we had this trauma where we turned on each other and it was for survival, but you need to be careful because it hasn't been cleaned up on the planet. And so it's kind of like if there's this pattern, right, or this wound that's available to be reignited in people, it's very easy to do that. So we as women need to make sure that we're allowing other women to be powerful. We want our own power. Are we going to let other people, other women be powerful? So it's that whole idea of if you see a powerful woman and she threatens you, ask yourself why. Don't just go on the attack and start talking to other women about her. Typically, it's your own fear that's getting ignited. And I just really want us women as a group to take responsibility for what happened and for what's still happening between women. It's not to victim shame or victim blame, but it is this kind of total accountability for ourselves and to stop that.
Absolutely. And that's such a good point that this wound is not just an individual wound, it's a wound of our community as well, and feeling safe in community and safe celebrating other women's power. And I know there's always a deeper layer of healing to go with that. I feel like, as a watcher of reality television, I have seen a trend changing where it's like women on reality shows. I mean, of course, there's still going to be an element of this, of course, but I watch mostly like the dating shows. They used to like compete with each other and be catty to each other and nasty with each other. And the pendulum is, it's not fully swung to like cooperation, harmony, and love. And I'm sure producers stir up drama, but I have noticed women starting to support other women more, and us starting to realize, like, hey, we're not the enemy here. Like, actually, we need to look towards greater systems that make us feel like there can only be one, or you have to show up like a mini man to be successful, or whatever it is. So I think that there's hope for us, but I think we're strongest together. And when we are broken apart and not standing together, it's so much easier for our movement to get dispersed. And I think, like you said, that's what kind of happened with the spiritualist movement. And it's still a religion that, you know, exists in this world. I actually studied at Arthur Findlay College, which is a spiritualist college. And I have a lot of respect and love for spiritualism. But I think, like, where I really want to end it with this sentiment today, which I totally agree with you, Teresa, is like, we have to stand together and we have to lift up other women and other people who are allies of love. And that's the way forward. And we can look backwards, because just like we can learn from the lessons of previous generations, we can also learn from their mistakes. And that might be where things fell apart a bit with like hierarchical structures and factions within women supporting women.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. You know, if we could just talk about it more, it's really good. So it's really good to have conversations like we're having. And it's really good to, I mean, Nasty Women Writers, my sister and I have been doing this for 8 years, and it is to really bring these stories forward of all the women that have been erased. And there's so many amazing women. I mean, it's just so inspiring to read about them and their lives and all the challenges they faced, and yet they kept doing what they felt was important. So to just keep raising our voices and supporting other women when we see them raising their voices, and not just women, anybody who's speaking out for human rights, but especially in the spiritual communities to try to do some healing, on that level for what's happened, for what was able to happen with the witch burnings and all the kinds of persecution that spiritual women have suffered. Take that into our sessions and ask what we can do to heal wounds and change these patterns.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a beautiful invitation to go back and look at the history of women of the suffragist movement, women who really pushed women's rights forward. And you might just see a smattering of psychic mediums that you didn't realize were psychic mediums amongst their numbers.
Yeah, lot of them. It was wildly popular. It was really, really popular. Yeah.
And it's so interesting how that has been so erased from herstory. And I'm just so grateful that we're able to have conversations like this that open Pandora's box for deeper research and remembering these people who were ahead of their time in many ways. So, Theresa, where can our audience find you and connect with you? Thank you so much for this conversation today.
Thank you, Taylor. Well, first of all, nastywomenwriters.com is the website that my sister and I co-founded to share stories of women of all times and places that had really important things to say and often were erased, but also to just educate people about how many women have been fighting for so long for women's rights. And then my personal website is ritualgoddess.com. That's ritual R. And there you can read more about me and my divination work and my books. That's where you can find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom and knowledge with the community. It's so, so appreciated.
Oh, and thank you for all that you do. Show's really important.
Thank you. Welcome back to Sitting with Spirit, my loves, the part of the podcast where we sit with our angels, our guides, those in spirit that want to share messages. Take what resonates, leave the rest. And if you know somebody who could benefit from these messages, please share it with them. So, as always, I'm going to start with the angel message. So, there's a theme coming up this week about going deeper. And I kept seeing like little holes being dug with shovels. And I feel like there's something about deeper layers of insight, like not just staying surface level, not just replaying what we already know about something, but going deeper in some way. And then with this, I saw the third eye coming up, and it was almost like the third eye, like in the pupil, there was like digging to be done. So I feel like there's also an element of this of going deeper with our own intuition, going deeper to how we're opening up, all of these things of like, we're ready now to traverse a deeper layer in some way. So that might show up emotionally, spiritually, and relationships, going deeper. Big theme. And then the next thing I saw was my symbol for like books and study. So I feel like for some people, this idea of going deeper might be learning more about something that's always interested them, studying something that's always interested them, something like that, following the curiosity, the hunger for knowledge. And then I felt called to share an image that came up in my mediumship circle this morning because it also felt like it was for the collective, for this sitting with spirit. And I love how my guides do that. It's like two birds with one stone, and I really appreciate it. But it's this image of a priestess in a dark forest. And she like has this basket of herbs and different things. And then she's also wearing this bright white silver cloak. And she's like weaving her way in this dark forest. And I feel like that almost ties in with this message of going deeper, where it's like the dark forest can kind of symbolize like our psyche, our subconscious, our healing path. And we're in this white illuminated cloak, and we have this basket of different tools in our toolbox, and like we're winding our way. And I feel like there's an ancestral element of this as well, because so many of our ancestors did not feel safe to go deeper or to do this deep healing work or to understand the shadow in any real type of way. It was always about survival, and avoidance was a tactic for survival. Not talking about things was a tactic for survival. So I feel like this kind of ties into it, that we're on this like initiated priestess journey where we're like, part of our magical journey is going deeper. And in this vein, the symbol that I saw around that, which was really more of an animal guide, was a wolf, but it was half white, half black. And I felt like there was something here about like, we're so focused. So the wolf to me is very inspired by my reading of Women Who Run with the Wolves. And it's like this symbol of the divine feminine, or rather the wild feminine, like what has been sanitized out of femininity. And that for so long, for our reclamation of being like wild women, we've been focusing on the light part of the wolf, which is like having fun, following our joy, shining our light, wearing whatever we want. Like all of that to me feels like in the light part. And part of this like priestess in the forest going deeper also lines up with this like side of the wolf that was in shadow, where it's like, now how can we reclaim the messy, inconvenient, hag like parts of our wild energy? And how can we love it just as much as the light parts of our wild energy? Because I think that's really where we're going, is like not just valuing our wildness on the light and the celebration and the joy, but remembering that to be fully wild, we have to embrace the messiness, the shame, the darkness, the sadness, all of those things that are part of our true duality as wild women, essentially, like loving that just as much. And that feels like a part of the going deeper. And like that wolf cry howling to the full moon is like asking us to love both sides, not just the light. And that feels like a recipe back to our primal nature. So, a lot of imagery kind of congruent in this one with like the dark forest and the wolf in shadow and the digging holes. It's like it's all asking us to go deeper, 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 deeper. Another part of the energy that I felt this week was like this kind of like thrilling energy. I almost felt like a body high. And I got this feeling of like doing things that scare us and thrill us a little bit, like a little bit of an adrenaline rush, a little bit of doing something that takes us out of a comfort zone. And with this, I felt like there was opportunity this week for magic and joy and expansion. So, like that two-sided wolf is such an important image for the week, because it's like there is that light-filled exploration, enlightenment, knowledge, magic play, but then there's also like the shadow side of going deeper, deeper, deeper. So yeah, I just kept coming back to this feeling of like I'm a little bit activated in my nervous system. I feel this like thrill, and I just want to move the energy. I want to create momentum with it. I want to do things that scare me a little bit. And then the next thing it flowed into was these seeds that were starting to come into bloom. So that makes me feel this sense of what we've been working towards, what we've been planting. We're starting to see that come into bloom. And with that, I was seeing a butterfly as an animal guide around that, of like spreading our wings, blossoming out of the chrysalis, transformation. And I just get this sense that the energy right now is bigger than us. Like there's something here about momentum, and it's almost like it's time now to jump out of the nest and spread our wings. That feels like part of the thrill too. It's like the energy feels urgent in this way, where it's like right now is the moment. Like don't hold yourself back, don't stay small, jump out of the nest. It's time to take flight. And there might be ways that we're pushed out of our comfort zone to do that. So as I'm transitioning to the spirit person, it's so funny. So for those of you that don't know, we record everything a little disjointed for Magic Hour, disjointedly, because I do client sessions every day. I'm quite busy, so I can't always record Sitting with Spirit on the same days that I record the episodes. And so I thought that we were recording this Sitting with Spirit for an episode that's going to come out next week. But then I realized it was for this episode, which was so synchronistic because the woman that came through was from the 1800s. And so I was like, wow, I didn't even realize that this was the Sitting with Spirit for this episode. So I love the synchronicities. So I had this woman in spirit from the 1800s who felt like such a force of love. Like she was so loving. She felt loved. I feel like she had a very beautiful relationship with her husband and her kids, and she loved being at home with them. And I just got this sense of like such firelight around her, like just this warm glow. Like I just wanted to be around her forever. And she also felt like she had this fierceness to her energy too. Like even though she was very warm and loving, I also felt such a deep rooted sense of power. I saw that she was very into fashion and design and how she dressed. And I got the name Macy or Maisie, something like that. And I got that she lost a daughter who passed very young. And she gave me this feeling of, basically, she showed me that the railroad came and opened up her life. Like she had this sense of like, I'm happy in my home. I'm happy with this life I've created. Like there's something about my husband supporting me. And almost this sense, which isn't really her words, but my interpretation of it, of like him being an ally. Like he supports me and respects me and good men exist kind of vibes. And that she wanted to highlight that like there's nothing wrong. She got a lot of satisfaction from her life. But then there's something about the railroad coming in and that connecting more places in the world than before and opening up her world. And there's something about exploring new frontiers. And she was almost comparing it to how the internet has transformed our life. Like, whereas the railroad opened up her world, it's like the internet opens up our world and makes everything feel interconnected. And so she was giving me this feeling of she was happy in her life before, and then she didn't even know how expanded life could be. And there's something about her enjoying every phase of the journey and making the most of it. She really wanted to stress that she loved being like a mother and a wife and at home in that unit. Like she loved it so much and that she got so much fulfillment from that. But there's this sense here in her message of like, but for the women today, take advantage of whatever your heart asks for. And I feel like this lady wanted to come through because we speak so much about being wild, big dreams, all of these things. I think that for me personally, my dream has never been to be a mother or a wife or in the home. It's just maybe something that's going to happen to me and maybe I'll start to feel different about it. Like it's not that I don't want that. It's just that that's not my main dream for my life, but for some people it is. And she was showing me the joy of that and that she wanted to state that too, because on this podcast we don't really talk about that very often, but that she, like, in the right circumstances with the right partner, really loved that. But there was some message here of like, the world keeps getting bigger. Like I thought it was big with the railroad coming in. Now you guys have it even bigger. And there's something about her just being like, don't wait to live your joy. Take the opportunity, do what excites you. And I feel like there's also something of like, you don't only have to be one thing. Like she was showing me that she liked so many different things. And so I think that like it's all kind of culminating in this sense of expansion, opening up, challenging our stories of self, challenging where we feel like we have to fit in a box or a label, because there's something about her of like, I was already living my dream life and I didn't even realize it could get better and bigger and more adventurous. And I love that. And so I think where she's taking us is this feeling of like a happy person can find happiness in any circumstances. It's less about that. And so I think she's just encouraging us, whether you're living a little slice of heaven life or a life on a big scale out in the big world, like you find happiness in both. Don't wait to find happiness. You can enjoy every chapter of life for different reasons. There's happiness in every single chapter in different ways and different reasons. And the last thing I'll say here is that there was this feeling of there are new frontiers. And she kept giving me this feeling of like, if she was alive today, she would have maybe done things in a more public way that she couldn't when she was here. And I feel like that's where she's cheering us on too. Like, don't wait. Like, do the things that excite you, do the things that bring you joy. It was just a very joyful connection with her. So I really enjoyed that. She felt really like a glass half full type of person. And that felt like it translated in every area of her life. And that she wanted us to take advantage of everything that women of her time could only dream of.
Wow, I love this person. I love her energy. It's such a great reminder for all of us, particularly ladies, but for all of us that, we have opportunities now that our ancestors didn't. And we can take advantage of living this freely and that they're in spirit cheering us on. And I loved what you said too of I think there's this like weird idea that if I'm totally happy and satisfied with my life as it is, it won't expand into anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a limiting belief. Like, just because you're happy and satisfied with this moment, life is always changing and expanding. So that's just a recipe for feeling joyful and happy in the next chapter and the next and the next. I just love that, and even with our dreams, it's like I think sometimes we'll limit our dreams. And there are dreams, like let's dream big, let's dream bigger than big. Who knows what's possible? And let's let our dreams go to the furthest reaches of the earth and then let life take us on that journey. I just love that. I love imagining her on the railroad, just living her best life.
Yeah, that's what I got the feeling is that her family started to work in the railroad and her husband was on it. And there's things there that connected it. And all of a sudden she could go to new places that would have been way longer of a journey and all of this stuff. So it just feels exciting. And I feel like there's something here too of like the internet really expanded our world, but there's even going to be something that expands it for future generations. Like our world is always opening up to the potentials and the possibilities. And it's our job to just like flow with it and evolve with it. And I like what you said too about how happiness can keep evolving. It's not a destination, it's a way of life. And so she
Mm.
has been happy throughout all of it. And it only allows her to stay in the happiness as it goes. So it's not to say she didn't have her struggles or her own things, but she chose happiness. And it's kind of like she could have focused on things that were not happy and had her own things she was battling with in her own time period. But I think she just always chose to be happy. And that just created the happiest life for her. Like it kept growing and evolving.
Yeah, it's such a good reminder. Such a good reminder. And sometimes we're in a moment where it's hard to find that happiness, and it doesn't mean we won't find it again. Just the choice to try and open ourselves to it is enough sometimes.
And going on our healing journey and wanting to understand why we're not feeling happy is a part of choosing happiness. It doesn't mean we have to feel the happiness all the time if it's not authentic, but getting curious about why we're not is choosing happiness.
That's such a good reminder because I think, we're both on a healing journey, aren't we all the time? But I've definitely been diving into that. And yeah, sometimes it's tough and hard feelings are coming up, and it can feel like you're not making progress. But your choice to be on a healing journey is your choice to be in greater happiness. That's the way we get there, is shining a light on things that are asking to be heard.
Absolutely. Exactly. It's like not one person in this world is just happy all the time. We're humans with duality. She was showing me that side of herself because her message was about happiness. But I think that's like one of the main things is that she chose happiness. Like she was satisfied in one era of her life, she was satisfied in another era of her life, and she just brought herself to those experiences.
That's so, so beautiful.
Yeah. So I love that reminder. And I loved the reminder too that sometimes we look backwards to like the state of women's rights and what was happening. We're like, oh my God, it must have been so difficult. It must have been so challenging. But then she was like, there were still pockets of a lot of happiness at that time. And I feel like even when people look back on our generation and what's happening now, they'll be like, wow, crazy what they're living through. What was it like? And I think that they'll look back and think that in many ways we're like savages, like the way we pass homeless people on the street and stuff like that. Like I think future generations will look back and be like, barbaric. I can't believe they do that. Weird. And so I think going back and connecting with her was also just a nice thread that like women have always been so resilient and women have always found their own pockets of love and happiness and want to make the world a better place too. And so it was just lovely to connect with her. And that's what really strikes me about everything with history is that there's so much more in common than not. Like even as a theater major, when I would read old plays and things like that, it's all the same as exactly what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and it's like that spiral we often talk about where you're like, "Oh my god, we're back here again," but it's not a circle, it's a spiral. So, we deal with the same things but at a more evolved consciousness or in a new way, in a new phase. And so, I think that's helpful for me when sometimes it feels like, "Oh, is history repeating itself?" It's like, "No. These same themes are coming up and we have new tools to face them."
Absolutely. And I just want to add, because another part of her message just dropped in, I just want to add that there's a message here of say yes to the adventure. Because I feel like sometimes if we're like just happy enough in our life, it's easy to say no to the adventure and stay where we are. But there's something about just like you'll never regret saying yes to the adventure.
That is so, so true. All the details will figure themselves out, but the adventure is their calling and you got to say yes.
You got to say yes. So I really hope these messages were helpful, and we will see you next week.
For more information on Taylor and her work, go to angelsandamethyst.com or connect with her on Instagram at angels_and_amethyst. She is the one verified account with this name and will never DM you for a reading. If you have any questions about intuition, spirituality, angels, or anything and everything magical, please email contact@magichourpod.com. We will answer listener questions once a month in our solo episodes. Are you an aligned business owner that would like to advertise to our beautiful hummingbird community? Please email contact@magichourpod.com. Make sure you're subscribing to Magic Hour so you never miss the magic. And don't forget to leave us 5 sparkling star reviews. They help more magical people find the pod. Please screenshot and email your 5-star reviews to contact@magichourpod.com, and we'll send you a free downloadable angelic meditation and enter you to win an angel reading with Taylor Page. If you review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, we'll add your name twice. And if you share the podcast on your Instagram story and tag us, we'll add your name a 3rd time. The next giveaway will happen when we hit 222 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Thank you for listening to Magic Hour with Taylor Page. Remember, you are magic.